Here to talk about what this means for the residents of Lahaina, Michael Kelly, a personal injury attorney who worked on lawsuits brought against Pacific Gas and Electric Company for the deadly wildfires that happened in California back in 2017. Good morning, sir. Thanks for giving us some time. We appreciate it. Curious as to your initial thoughts when you heard about Hawaiian Electric's general liability insurance policy.
My general thoughts were I was really quite surprised and wondered who it was in management that would have selected such a nominal amount, given the fact that you've got one company that insures all the electrical wires, poles, generators on all the islands. And if we compare that to what we saw in Northern California back in 2017, PG&E here had somewhere around $870 million in coverage, certainly not enough. But nonetheless, when you think about $4 to $5 billion in damage and $165 million in coverage, it really makes you wonder whether anybody was awake at the switch in terms of protecting the folks on the islands in the event of a disaster like this.
So what then happens to the victims of this disaster? That's a pretty big disparity, 165 million and 5 billion.
Well, and really that's the doubling of the tragedy. Of course, I've been to Lahaina. People who have been there or seen the footage have seen that Old Town Lahaina was essentially incinerated. The company does not have, as best I think anyone can tell, sufficient assets or the ability to capitalize itself in a way to pay for these things. There are potentially other defendants who will be in some of these 2,000 to 4,000 lawsuits that are filed. There are only a handful filed so far. Some people have suggested that these cases may go into bankruptcy. That is the cases against Hawaiian Electric. For me, the real concern for the people there is the inability of Hawaiian Electric to respond in damages to pay 100% of the losses. And I've not seen any forecasts on precisely how much or how little they can pay. But clearly, the residents, the business owners, the folks in Lahaina are going to need help from I think the state government, potentially the federal government, and then I think you're going to see lawsuits against others who may be potentially liable, landowners who are adjacent, who failed to maintain their properties and had a tremendous amount of dry grass and weeds that helped accelerate the fire, and then possibly other utilities who also used the poles. What happened here were poles broke in the high wind. It caused a short, which caused a fire. You then add that to the high winds, and you get fire moving at 30 to 40 miles an hour that simply can't be controlled.
And listen, to your point about bankruptcy a minute ago, when companies don't have enough to pay their bills, I mean, we just had a story in the news last few days, Rite Aid here in America closing thousands of stores primarily because they had to pay so much because out of those opioid lawsuits. So things like this can end a company if they don't have the money. It's a very real thing here. At the end of the day, probably the average Lahaina resident who lost everything, home, business, maybe both, you know, they don't necessarily want to get in the weeds of this company's insurance policy. They want their money to rebuild and restart their life. So they wake up to this news and think, well, oh my God, if they don't have the money to make me whole, what happens to me and my home and my businesses? What should be on their minds when they hear this story? The average person who lost it all.
Yeah, first of all, I think that's a very fair and accurate concern of the folks who initially heard this. And so their question is there some way for Hawaiian Electric to get additional capital? Do they get partners? Do they partner with another utility company? Do they issue stock or bonds? But I think next in line, they have to ask, are we going to get any help either from the state government or the federal government? And then I think all of the attorneys who are working on this on behalf of residents are looking at the potential for making recoveries against other defendants, as I said earlier, who may have some liability for some other part of providing fuel for the fires or actually starting the fires if their equipment had overloaded the poles. Not unlike anywhere else in the country, you've got poles that are carrying both electrical transmission lines and communication lines, phone lines, cable TV. And so I know that there are people looking at that as well.
Can I ask you just a final question, maybe outside the bounds of your legal expertise here, just an average American question. If our nation has money for Ukraine and Israel, should we have money for Lahaina?
I don't think there's much question that the answer to that is yes. I think no matter the disaster, we'd always like to take care of our own first. And the people of Lahaina have suffered really a horrible tragedy, and complicating it and doubling it by now having not enough funds to help them rebuild their own homes and churches and businesses is, it's just not right.
Michael Kelly, personal injury attorney, thanks so much for your time and insight, sir. We appreciate it.